All right, so welcome everyone to the September 2020 ANZ PowerShell and DevOps user group meeting. You can find us all over the place online at ANZPSU, well, under ANZPSUG. Got a couple of links there on the slide. The main one is that GitHub IO one, because from there you can link off to everything. We've got Twitter, Meetup, YouTube. And on there as well is a list of upcoming meeting dates and who we've got lined up. And if you happen to go and have a look, we are in need of speakers. So if you're keen, let us know. And in fact, let any of us know, or the main Twitter handle. So I'm Josh King here in New Zealand, and over in Aussie, my co-organisers are Adam and Shah. Adam's here in chat today, and unfortunately, Shah's not.
Hi, everyone.
So you feel free to reach out to any of us or all of us. And if you're a first-time speaker and a bit nervous about doing a full talk, still get in touch, because we can. What we've done before is paired up a couple of shorter talks to fill out a meeting. Coming up. And I kept information about the CFP in here because it is open for another day and a half. So there's a 24-hour online PowerShell and DevOps conference coming up, organised by PowerShell.org and the folks at the PowerShell Conference EU and Asia. So it is going to be 24 hours, and they need speakers around the world to keep the flow of content going. So at PowerShell.org/24hour. I obviously haven't been keeping up with the news. So if you are interested in speaking, the CFP is open for another day and a half. The event itself is on the 15th of October. I believe that's starting like midnight UTC, going through to the following midnight UTC. And sessions can be live or pre-recorded. Yeah. And also the PowerShell Conference Book Volume 3 was just complete, I think 2 days ago. It's a really good read. And the proceeds from it go to the DevOps Collective's On-Ramp Scholarship Program, which helps to get folks into the IT Ops field. And hopefully soon we'll get some people over to the PowerShell Summit. So tonight, though, we're joined by Alec Clews, who's talking about Git from the PowerShell prompt. Oh. So if you want to take over, Alec, it's all yours. You're on mute there, Alec.
Sorry about
there we go.
Sorry about that. Sorry, yeah, my name's Alec. I'm based in Melbourne, so we're all very happy here. We've got an extra hour removed from our curfew today, so we can, in theory, stay out till 9 o'clock at night. But there's nowhere to go because it's all shut, so who cares? And I work at a local software house called Papercut. Some of you may use our products if you work in the education department, the education sector in particular. But I'm actually going to talk about Git and PowerShell today. So I'm actually not going to do any slides. I've just got these notes here that hopefully you can all see, so you can browse them later. I've only got an hour, so there's a limited amount of things that I can cover, and I have to take shortcuts and lots of things I don't tell you. So there's lots of links in these notes for you to go and explore on your own. And if you scroll down, the most important part of all this is I give you links to other videos and blog posts and online books that you should read, which will teach you the details. And it's pretty important that because I'm not going to be able to go through enough of the material or in enough detail to do that. Does everybody hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yep, good. Thanks. Okay, so let's actually start doing something practical. So I'm going to be working here in a directory, an empty directory I created. So I'm in a directory called temp git demo, and this is an empty project, so it's got nothing in it at the moment. Now that is a slight lie, because what I do have is Visual Studio Code snippets file. So I'm actually not going to have you watch me type. I've prepared bunches of snippets to just have all the code pre-prepared. But for those of you not familiar with this is the Visual Studio Code editor. So along the bottom here, we've got a PowerShell prompt. I'm using PowerShell course 703. It's fairly up to date. And I've already installed Git by following the instructions that are in the notes. And I can go Git version, I think. And I've got the latest version, which is 2.28 installed. Let me just bring up my demo script so I don't lose my place. Where did I put it? Here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a project, and I'm going to make some changes to it and do various bits and pieces. And as I do that, I'm going to explain how version control fits in. It's obviously going to be quite simplistic, but hopefully by seeing this, we might be pointing things out as we go through. For those of you who don't have any version control experience, it'll kind of introduce you to the basic concepts. For those that are used to other version control tools or using a GUI, you'll get to see how it works on the PowerShell prompt. Just a matter of interest, is there anybody on the meeting who would call themselves a complete version control novice? Okay, so most of you got some experience, but I'll still draw some. Oh, okay, we do have one or two. Okay, so I will be drawing attention to, as we go through, I'll be drawing attention to some fundamental principles and ideas about version control, not just about Git. Okay. So there's some installation instructions on how to install Git. I use Chocolatey to do my installation, so it's very simple. I can just go choco install Git. And I also like to install PoshGit, and you'll see why I do PoshGit in a minute. And it's not going to work because, first of all, I've misspelled it, of course, but also because I don't have elevated privilege. But I've already done all this, so it's installed. But the point is, I've installed two modules: Git itself, which is the core binary and functionality, and the other thing is I've installed PoshGit, and PoshGit gives me some tab completions on Git commands, and it also gives me some fancy prompt information, which we'll see in a minute. The next thing you need to do after you got Git installed is you need to configure it. So if I do git config, I can actually see that I've already set up my username. Now I have a fancy environment because I'm running Windows subsystems for Linux and PowerShell, and I've got my git config spread across it, so I have to actually put the includes parameter in. If you're just using PowerShell, you won't need to do that. But then I can actually get my configuration settings. So the obvious one is my username, which is just the text of my full name. I'm on Windows, so I've actually got some magic in here to make sure that the differences between Unix and Windows file names are correct. There's links in the notes to tell you what that means and further references on how you can configure that and what you should set it to in your particular environment. Now, what I haven't done, and you will see this in most environments, is I haven't set my user email address. So if I do email, it comes back blank. That's something that I do specifically. It's not part of the general process. They usually say, do set your user email. And what I'll show you in a minute is how I set the user email on a per repository basis. So for each version control database, I can have a different email address. So that's quite useful with Git, because Git identifies you by your email address. So if you have personal projects and you have work projects, you'll probably want to use a different email address in both. So it's quite useful to set your email address on each version control database that you create. We'll see that in a minute. So what I've got here is I've got this empty directory. And in fact, it's so empty that if I do ls-force, the only directory I've got in there is VS Code. And if I issue a git command called git status to tell me what the git status current directory is, it says not a git repository. So the first thing I need to do in order to start performing version control operations is to create a version control database. And those are called repositories. So that's a pretty easy thing to do. This is an empty project. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go git init. Now that did something magical, because suddenly my prompt has changed to say that I'm on a main branch and there's no real changes to be modified. Well, in fact, there's one change to be modified. There is one change that's not the control. And if I do a git status, it says, well, you have a system with no commits in it, and you're on a branch called main. I'll explain more about what this means later. And you have files that I can see, but you aren't tracking under version control. So one of the things we can immediately say is that the purpose of version control tools is to track changes to files over time. But currently we have some files and we're not tracking them. But if I do if I do an ls, nothing's apparently changed. So what's the magic that's happened that means that I suddenly have a Git repository that I can't see, and I've got all this information that I don't. Where's that coming from? Well, if you do an ls-force, Git has actually created a repository for you. So in your project at the top level, you will have a .git directory, which is normally hidden. And inside the .git directory are various things which we don't need to worry about, but that is where Git will record all of your version control information, auditing information, all the things that we'll see later on. At the moment, you don't need to worry about any of that. Just know that it's there, and this is your local repository. Okay. And in Git, you'll tend to have one repository per project or per large submodule for various values of large and module. It's somewhat different to older systems like Subversion, where typically you would have a single large Subversion repository in which multiple projects were stored. In Git, it tends to be that you have many smaller repositories. So those who are used to those larger repos might find that one difference. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to start my project, because at the moment I still don't have a real project. So I'm going to create a file called report, and it's a script file. So I can, in Visual Studio Code, if I just type this code command followed by the name of the file, it will create that file for me, and it will open it in the current terminal window. And there it is. And it also starts off an integrated console as well, which I don't really want. So I'll get rid of that. Go back to here. So I've actually got some snippets, so I'll just put a snippet there. So that's a simple couple of commandlets which I can save this file and I can actually run it, and it will display some output about some services. These are actually paper cut application services that are running in the system. And what I can do now is that, of course, if I do ls, I've got this extra file, and if I do git status, I can see that it's identified another untracked file. So this file I created is now untracked. The Git database just has no record of it. So Git's saying to me, you've got this file, I don't know anything about it, and you might want to do something. So I want to track this file because this file is going to have new features added to it. It's going to be part of a bigger project. So the whole point of having a version control system is so that I can see and record and manage those changes over time. And the way that you start tracking or start adding changes into the Git repository is to do git add and then the name of the file that you want to start tracking. And because I'm on Windows, Git came from the Unix world. In Git, text files are stored with the line feed ending. So you'll often see this message saying, I'm going to replace the character return line feeds I find with just line feeds in your system. But it's generally something you don't have to worry about. So you can just ignore that. So now if I do git status again, that file, so let's just make this a bit bigger. Previously, report one was an untracked file. It's now a tracked file. It hasn't been committed, so it's very important. It's not part of the version control database, but it is ready to be committed into the version control database. And it's probably worthwhile flipping over to this web page and showing you this very important picture here. So just make that a bit bigger. So we were working on something that's called the working copy. So all the files that you have that you can see that you edit, part of your project, that's your working copy. And then the repository is the database that's stored in the .git directory. And in order to get changes from your working copy into the repository, there's a two-stage process. First of all, you have to add the changes, excuse me, into the index. That's also called staging. So you stage changes, or you add, often people say I'm adding changes to the staging or the index. And once you have a set of changes, and you can actually, it's a process of adding changes to files, perhaps moving files, renaming files. But once you have a set of changes in the index that make a coherent and complete set, you can then commit it to the repo. So the repo sees this carefully curated set of changes from the index as part of that single commit. So, that's a big difference between many version control tools and Git, is that Git recording changes in the repository is a two-stage process. You add a change to the index through staging, and then you commit the change to the repository. So what we've done is we've done the first stage. We've added the change. And if I flip back to here, that's what we said. These are changes to be committed, but it's nicely changed color, so that sounds good. And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to commit that change. So I do git commit. I'm going to spell it correctly eventually. If I hit tab, it'll complete it for me. I should have done that. And it's going to open up the editor window. So I'd already configured, and again, instructions in the notes on how to do this, but I've already configured the editor to be code. So it's already brought up a second editor window. And in here, I'm expected to type a sensible message. So usually when we do the first commit, we say initial commit. Draft report, work in progress. Okay. And this is sort of the way that you craft commit messages. There's a title, there's a line at the top which summarizes the change. And then there's a set of more details further on. There's a blank line in between them. So that's a well-formed commit message. And it's designed as a reference to your future self. We'll see why this is important in a minute. So I'm just going to hit Control-W in my editor and save that file. And once that file is changed, Git attempts to commit it. Now, that's actually fine up until this point, but it said, well, there's a problem. I don't know who you are because you haven't set your email address. I've guessed who you are. And this is not a valid email address. This would not work. And this is because I didn't set my user.email config setting earlier on purpose. So what I can do is I can do git config. And I'm not going to use global. So normally when you see this documented, it's ---- global to make it a global setting for all of your repositories on your system, but we're not going to do that. We're going to make it local. I'm going to say user email is, and I'll set my personal email address. So whatever email address I want, and then all the commits record against that email address. And then it told me, well, once you've set that, then all you have to do is to run this command here, and it will modify the commit. So it brings up the commit again. It says, do you want to change anything? No, I don't. So I close the editor window, and now it's made the commit. Now, let's do something very important. You have to use the git log command. The git log command shows me who, this time the correct email address, when, and it shows me the message that I typed in as the commit message. It also records all the changes. So this is the heart of version control, is creating time-stamped snapshots of the changes in the history of your project. And we'll see this later on. At any time, you can go back and forth in the history, retrieve previous versions. So that is the essence of version control. No matter what version control tool you use, that is the essence of version control, is recording changes over time, recording metadata about the changes, recording the specifics of what changed, and then being able to recreate those historical revisions as required. That's probably a good opportunity to pause and see if there's any questions.
There's been nothing in chat, but if people want to ask questions, do fire them through.
Yeah. Okay. Right, so I'll plow on, but if you've got any questions, do post them. Now, let's do the git status command again. Now, we've still got this file here called VS Code, which I don't want to commit to my project. It's not important for my project because this is just here with some settings for my personal editor. And if I share this project with somebody else, they won't care what my settings for my editor are. They've got their own settings for their own editor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a new file. And in that file, I'm going to put the .vs code string. And I'm going to give it a magic name, which is .git ignore. And Git treats this as a special file. So if I do git ignore, and if I do git status now, it's changed because it read the git ignore and said, well, you wanted to ignore VS Code. So I'm not going to worry about VS Code anymore. So this VS Code has been removed from the annoying list of things that Git says you've got untracked files. But Git has now, of course, said, well, but there's this new file called git ignore that you're not tracking. So what you do is that you do indeed add git ignore to your staging area, and then you do git commit. And I'm going to take a shortcut here. Instead of waiting for the editor to come up, I'm just going to give -m for message, go added git ignore, because it's a very small change. And anybody who uses Git will understand immediately what that means without me having to add any extra information. And now if I do git status, I'm on branch main, there's nothing to commit, working tree is clean. So everything that's important in my project is now being stored in the repository. It's all safe, as long as my laptop doesn't blow up, because of course it's still actually on my local hard disk drive, or should I say SSD now, we don't have hard disks. So yeah, so I can make a mess in my working area, in my working directory. It's not a problem. I'll always go back to history. If I do a git log, you can see actually there's now 2 commits, and it always records the current checkout as head. You can always refer to head, that's the magic. But you don't need to bother. You'll just see it used quite a few times. And head is pointing at a branch called main. I'll talk more about branches later. You'll see I've called my default branch main, by the way. That's because I've configured my system deliberately to do that. you may see it called master or trunk or something different depending on how the system is set up. There are instructions again in the notes on how you can configure that for yourself. Okay. So a good commit message. Yes, there are references. I put them in the notes on how to do commit message, on how to make commit messages. Basically, a commit message is a message to your future self and your teammates about why you did the change and any significant important things. You obviously have a diff of the specific lines, files and lines that changed. You need to give yourself the context. Why was this change done? What was important about it? What will I need to know in order to make sense of that change in the future? Okay. The let's go back into our very poorly written script now and make some more changes. So I'm just going to add in a standard comment block, and this is you know, nothing too contentious. It's just a comment block. So I'm going to save that away, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test it. So before you make changes to I lost my mouse cursor. Before you make changes or commit changes, I beg your pardon, into your repository, one of the habits you need to get into is testing it. So having made that change, let's just test that. It's actually got a bug in it. It's got this spurious character here. So let's remove that, save it away, and test it again. Okay, so it's doing what it's doing. I've got a standard comment block in it. It's getting a little bit better. I might actually want to see what's different about the version that I've written and the version that I've committed. So if I can use things like the git diff command. Because it's a simple project, I can use git diff on its own. And in green, it just lists all the lines that I've added. So the thing that is not in green, which is this bottom one, is the thing that's the same between the version in the repository and the version on my system. And if there were any lines to be taken away, they've been red. So it produces little handy reports like this to give you some idea of what you've done and what's going on. If we do the git status command, it says, well, there's nothing that's untracked, but there is a modified file. So I do know about this file, but it's different to what I have recorded in the repository database. Now, again, we're about to hit one of the big differences between Git and some of the other version control tools out there is that once the file is tracked, you still have to add each individual change to the index. So if you use a tool like Subversion at this point, you'll just do a commit. You've added the file, and then you can just keep doing commits. But in Git, you have to keep adding the changes into the index. And again, the model here is that you are making small changes and adding them into the index as you go along, and you may be removing files or renaming files. So you're actually not adding a file, you're adding specific small changes to the index, and often you see that referred to as crafting a commit. So we can go add, and this time I'm actually just going to go add dot, and that will add everything in this directory that papercut that Git knows about. So if I do that, and I do a git status again, it says, well, this file is modified, but it is staged. You can unstage it if you want. There's the command there. So if the last thing you did was an accident, you can actually take it out of the index, so it won't be committed. But we will commit this. So git commit, and again, I'm going to do -m. Added a standard comment block. Anyway, it is, and now I have an audit list of everything that's gone on in my system, all the changes in my project, and when and why they were done. Now, suppose I make a mistake. Suppose I create something I don't want. So I'm going to create some text in a file that's not wanted. And I'm going to go git add file not wanted, git commits, and this time it's oops. Oh dear, I've added a file I don't want. So I actually can use the git remove command. So the git remove, the git add, and the git move commands are all the three commands that operate on the index and allow you to craft these changes. So having made a mistake previously, the change I'm going to make now is I'm actually going to remove something from the index. So if I remove, I can't remember what it's called, I'm not wanted. And if I do git status now, it says this file is marked for deletion in the index. And it's also been removed from my working area. So it's actually done two things. It's physically removed the file from my working directory by project. It's also remarked it for deletion in the index. So if I do git commit now, and again I'm going to take a shortcut and say remove mistake. And with git log, you know, we keep accumulating these changes. Let's just check the chat, see if there's any questions so far. Okay. Let's do one more thing. We did a git add. We've done a git remove. The last one is the git move. So if you look at this, calling something report is not very useful. So I'm actually going to do git move report 1 to paper cut report status.ps1. Again, one thing I didn't draw your attention to is because I've installed PoshGit, the prompt is giving me extra information about the status of my working directory. I'm not going to go through what all these mean. If you look at some of the videos that I've linked in the notes, then Scott Hanselman goes through this in quite a bit of detail, so it's quite useful. But if I do a git status, it tells me where you've renamed this file. So if I do git commit -m rename file, let's see. So what I introduced there was a context for change request reference. So this is probably old hat to most people, but often you will embed a reference to the specific change request or ticket number that you're fixing with the change. So that's another way of giving yourself and your colleagues some context as to why this change was done. How often do you commit? How often do you commit? If you commit frequently, do you compact the commits? So there's the right. So the answer to that question is it depends on your personal habit. So if it's a personal project, you can also do what you want. If you're part of a team, there will be conventions that you'll follow, and that'll evolve over time. If you remember an open source project, they tend to be a lot more prescriptive, and will recommend that when you can do whatever commits you want. So remember, all of these commits I'm doing are inside my local workstation, and I haven't published them to anywhere. So I could actually go back now and start squashing commits and producing what's called a nice clean git. So, you know, a lot of these changes could be all squashed into a single commit because they're trivial. And then when I publish it, I'm only publishing a few commits. To be honest, I'm a bit lazy, so I work on small projects. I tend to work on projects on my own, so I don't do much squashing of commits. They just go up. because I want to rush on to the next thing. But a lot of people consider that to be bad practice. And if I was part of a bigger team, I might take more care. Can you add a multi-line commit message from the command line interface? I want to say no, but I'm not sure if you can do that. I would have to read the manual. Typically, people and doing, particularly for sort of a final, if you're doing a final commit that's part of a change request or something specific, so you finished a chunk of work or finished a change set, to use a terminology, then you would not do a single line message. You would do something a bit more meaty that referenced the change request records, that briefly outlined the change and the scope and anything to be wary of and that sort of thing. So doing single line messages like I'm doing is probably generally not great practice, although we all do it a lot. It's because Git commit messages are a standing joke in the community about how poor they are. Right, how far have we got? How much time have I got left? Okay, going a bit slowly. I keep talking about wanting to see what's changed. You can see what you did in the last commit with some useful ships. Whoops. If I do git, where have I gone? Git show head, I can show. Oh, sorry. If I do git show head, it showed me that the last change I made was a rename. So when I did a git log, I just get the very brief details. If I do git show, I get more information, which includes the status. If I do git show with an up arrow, that's actually going back one more revision from head. So head is the current revision, the current commit. Showing me the last commit. Putting an up arrow after it, circumflex goes back one, and doing two goes back two revisions or two commits. So that's actually showed me a bit more. Okay, I'm going to jump into branches now. Let me just check any messages. Okay, so if you run the report, you'll see that it's reporting on the status of all of the services that are running related to Papercut application. The reason I did this was because I manage and write code for Papercut. I don't write Windows System Administrator code, so this was the examples I had lying around. There's another service up here called the Epson solution for Papercut, and that's a third-party system which some of our customers who have Epsons will install and run. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to improve this report specifically for the Epson customers. So what I need to do is I actually need to branch off from my current main development stream and create a special version for Epson. So the way you do that is by creating a new branch. So if I do git branch, it shows I only got one branch. In fact, if I do minus all, that will guarantee that I get all the branches, not just the last few that I've been using. It does try and cut down. These lists of branches can get very long, so it does try and cut them down. But I've only got one branch. It's called main. It's currently my branch. So what I do is create a new branch called Epson. So the way I do that is I go git branch, git checkout, and I say I want to create a new branch called Epson. Now, if you look at the documentation and manuals, they'll often show that you use the branch command. There's multiple ways of doing it. Creating a new branch. This is the way that I find most natural. Is just say, right, I want to check out a new branch. So now if I do git branch, it lists two branches and it stars the one I'm on, which is Epson, and shows that I'm not on main. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up my report and I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add some more code. So what this code does is it just goes through and it counts through the log messages. So I know that there's an Epson log file, and I'll just count errors. It's an extremely crude metric and not at all reasonable, because my computer's not attached to an Epson device, so it'll have lots of errors in the log. But for the sake of illustration, this works. So the first thing we do, of course, is that we test it. And we see that it's created a new line in the report saying the Epson plugin reported 25 errors, which is not surprising. And I'm now going to add that in. So I'm going to do git. So if I do git status, it shows that one file has been modified. Now normally I do git add, and then I do git commit. There is a shortcut, and I can do git commit -a, which says if any of the files that you currently have under version control have been modified, then add them to this commit. So it's doing the add for me, but only for files that are already tracked. It's not doing the commit, or it won't do the add for any new files that it doesn't know about. I can just add in a message here. Again, I'm taking shortcuts. And git log, and I've got the first Epson. Now notice that Epson head is pointing to the Epson branch. The commit before that was on the main branch. So this is showing that main and Epson have kind of verged off, split apart. Now then, there. Now I'm not terribly happy with this report, because if there is no Epson log file, it's going to error out. So actually, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put in a new version, and this one actually checks to see if the Epson service is running, or is present rather, and need to rearrange this a bit, so I'll put this back up here. And I can take this out. So now if I run this, remember, always test before you commit. It seems to be working, so I'm actually now going to add in this. And again, if I do a git log, I've actually got 2 commits now on the Epson branch, and the main branch is set all the way back here. Now, I did say this would be a PowerShell presentation, but I just want to use one GUI tool to show that if I do git k --all, this is a tool that's supplied with Git. You can get a graphical tickle environment which comes up and shows you that in fact you have 2 branches. Main's got no more work on it, but Epson has moved forward, and branch is now connected to this thing that has a message of Epson v2 on it. So we've had a fork in the road. Now I can go back to main now. So if I go git check out main, at the moment, yellow is the checked out version. It says Epson. If I go file update, it actually shows that yellow is now main. So I've actually checked. The Epson is safely stored away in version control, but the main branch is now checked out, and I can start doing changes on it. So let's add some changes to this. So also the other thing, which is pretty obvious, we've actually gone back to the version of the file that has no Epson code in it. So by switching branches, we've gone back to the plain sort of vanilla version of the report. Let's add something a bit nicer in here. Sorry, I'm pushing the wrong one, I think. Nope. Yeah. I'm actually going to add in a huge, sorry. I've actually generated a whole, this is now much fancier, works very differently. I've made a huge change to this script. It's using APIs within Papercut and all sorts of things. In actual fact, I actually need to create a new script called setup. And if I type the appropriate segment into here, this actually is a .NET setup script which will actually build a DLL for me. So I'm going to run setup. And whilst that's running, I will check to see if there's any questions. I approve the use of Vim, so yes, carry on. You can stack your -m. Okay, good trick. The problem with the stacking is how you'd have to stack an empty line between, because you really should do a title line, a blank line, and then the body of your commit message. So it'd be a bit awkward. I think using an editor is much simpler. So it's actually built a DLL for me. If you go in here, somewhere down here, there is indeed a DLL. So we're going to make use of that DLL. It's not important. But if I now go back to this thing here and save it, I should be able to run this new report. And what that has actually done is it's used various APIs in our product to create more information. So this is obviously the output from the get service command, but down here I actually used API information to find out information about printers. So Papercut manages printers and devices. For those of you not seen it before, so that's just reporting information about the installation and total number of printers and total number of devices in the system. And I could extend this with more, but what I haven't got in here is my Epson stuff. So now I have a working report. I need to do a git status. And the first thing I want to do is I want to ignore the built DLLs I've created. So I can just add that directory into there. And now if I'd go git status, I've got this report.html file, which I'm not really interested in. So I'm going to add that in as well. That's the output from my script. So I'll save that away. Not interested in that. So let's see where we're at with the git status now. So I've modified git ignore. I've modified this. I've got to add setup. So I can go git add setup.ps1. Git status now shows me I've got a file ready for staging, and I've got some unstaged changes. So I can do git status. Again, I'm going to be lazy. -am added health API info. And I misspelt something. Git status, git commit, beg your pardon. Right. Now let's go back to this handy picture, and this will actually show it, which is probably be a lot more, much more of a revelation. I do actually have two branches now, so I've got two parallel streams of development going on, and I'm about to run out of time, so I'm very quickly going to scoot through the rest. I'm going to cheekily merge the Epson changes because I would like to have a single version that does everything. So I'm going to bring the Epson changes back into main, and I can do that with git merge Epson. And it says there's a problem because there were things that were overlapping that I couldn't handle. So I'm going to, again, the videos and reference material I've given will take you through this in more detail. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm sorry. I actually need to take this into here and put it inside here. So merging changes from multiple sources. No, I haven't. Yep, that's all there, so I don't need any of this. Test it, always test. And it has, lo and behold, worked. So no error messages came out. I got a report of all the old information plus the output from the Epson. So I can now, if I look at git status, it says we've got to decide what to do about this because you've got changes from one and changes from the other. They conflicted. I'd save those changes away, so I can go git add. And if I do git status now, it says modified but not committed. So git it. Now, I'm not going to do the AM on purpose because it's going to come up with a message. It says, I knew you were trying to merge Epson into the main branch. So I'm going to, and you've now fixed that. So I'm going to assume that this is the sort of message you want. Right, so just save that away. And very quickly, right, so we have now brought everything back together again, and it's all good. I'm very quick now. So all of this demo stuff is in the repository that and that's from the notes. I am finally just going to quickly show you GitHub. So the first thing is that I installed the GitHub command line tool, which is called GH. You can install that with Chocolatey. And that means that I can now type GitHub commands from the Git prompt and magic will happen. So if I go GitHub repository create and make it public, because I want you all to be able to see it if you need to. Repository description, a demo. So what that's now doing is creating a new repository called Git demo. Because I'm identified as Alec the Geek, it's creating that in the Alec the Geek account. If I flip over very quickly to GitHub, I look in my own account. There's the new repository that's been created, which is empty. It's got nothing in it, but it's there existing. So now that I've created this repository, which is available to anybody to look at and share and modify and send changes to, I can now actually push those changes up. So I can go GitHub push -- set. I don't have to try and run at a time up into origin main. Just take this as some magic. You have to a Git repo push, I think. Git push. Oh yeah, don't use GitHub for that. So that's now using the standard Git command to push those changes up into GitHub. So now if I hit refresh here are the things that we've done today. And as a matter of interest, it's showing the commit times on my machine. So it's actually showing the time that Git recorded the change. Git has a concept that it always records the true time. And if you move the changes or push the changes to another repository, it takes the time with it. Okay. And now I have something that other people can play with, and they can use this code button to clone the repository onto their own workstation and start making changes.
I may have missed it there, Alec, but because you use the GH command within your Git repo, did that set the upstream for you automatically? Oh,
it did.
Nice.
But fear not, if you don't use the Git, and the GitHub command line utility is in fact still in beta. It's just that, as I said, this was Git from the PowerShell prompt. I thought I'd show it off. You can do it all from the browser, and the browser will show you the commands that you need to run without having to install the GitHub utility. So I was just being extra fancy.
Now that's handy because I always have to look up the Git command to set that upstream, and it's one of those things that never stick for me.
That's what I kind of where'd it go? I did actually set the upstream there. What the GitHub command was set origin.
Right.
So if I do GitHub, Git origin, no, Git remote, origin, it will show me the value. Actually, it won't show me the value.
-v.
Yeah, thank you, -v. How often I do this? No, I still did it wrong.
Without the origin.
Yep. So this is so when I did the GitHub GH repo, whatever it was, somewhere, yeah, this bit here, it then set the origin for me. So it did set the origin, but that wasn't enough. I had to actually then say, right, this is the branch I'm going to push to the origin. So that's what that does. So it said push to the origin, and the origin is on GitHub. I want you to push the main branch, which is that branch, the local branch here. And I want you to set that same branch on the upstream. And so if you go into here, there's only one branch called main. Does that make sense, Josh?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, some of that bit of that was rushed, I'm afraid. As I said, it was quite a short length of time, but do use the notes. And if you've got any questions, you can find me on Twitter or the usual places, or you can even raise an issue. So if you go to the wherever it was, so this is the repository on which all this material is based. But if you go to here, you can actually raise an issue. That's a good way to ask a question.
Perfect.
So that'll give you some practice with using GitHub. And this repository is linked here.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think you've finally inspired me to start using the CLI.
Good.
Been using the GUI tools as a bit of a crutch for too long.
I mean, there are GUI, there are version control tools built into Visual Studio, but I don't use them because you never know when you haven't got Visual Studio available.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? I'll share that link Again, I know it was shared at the start, but just in case. I see lots of typing happening.
Okay, well, I've actually set aside a bit more time, so I'm happy to answer more questions or demonstrate more things, but I was aware that this technically was only an error, I think.
If there's questions, we can keep running as long as we need to. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, the graph thing's kind of cool from log. I used to use that all the time, rather than use the, but Git K in some ways is easier to look at, particularly for larger branching models.
Well, I'll stop the recording here. Thanks everyone for coming along. And actually, our next meeting is October the 12th. And we are looking for a speaker. So if anyone's interested, reach out.